In some cases, pathogens can get past the first line of defense. For example, if you have an open wound on your skin or a cut of some sort, that is a breach in that first line of defense, and a pathogen can get into the deeper structures in the body. So there's a second line of defense, which is still part of the innate or non-specific immune defense that can kick into gear in order to help attack the pathogens that have made their way a little bit deeper into the body. The second line of defense includes primarily some different cells that can attack pathogens, and then some antimicrobial proteins and some other chemical signals that are involved. So let's take a look first at phagocytes. A phagocyte is a class of cells, and it's a cell that can engulf and basically eat a pathogen. So I put a little Pac-Man on here, and this is a really cool photo, I think. This is a type of macrophage in purple, and these are little bacteria here. And these little cellular extensions are reaching out to grab the bacteria, and then it's going to pull the bacteria into the phagocyte, where within the cell it's going to break that bacteria down and basically keep it from infecting any other cells in the body. Now, these phagocytes can be attracted to infected areas. So if a pathogen gets in, or if it gets past the first line of defense, the damaged tissue in the area can give off chemicals. And chemotaxis is the word that describes the ability for cells to kind of follow that chemical trail in order to move towards the area of infection. So some different types of phagocytes include neutrophils. Neutrophils are one of the types of leukocyte or white blood cells that we talked about when we talked about the blood cells. Monocytes, which are also a type of leukocyte or white blood cell, and they differentiate into macrophages. And the word macrophage means big eater, so they are very, very good at eating and kind of neutralizing bacteria. And then there are also some cells called dendritic cells, and they all work in very similar ways in that they can engulf a pathogen and then break it down inside the cell. Natural killer cells, which we also just call NK cells, can attack cells that have already been infected. So they'll kill body cells that are already damaged in order to prevent the pathogen in the infected cell from spreading further. And natural killer cells do this by releasing perforin and granzymes. Perforins are proteins that are able to poke a hole in the cell membrane of the infected cell. Granzymes are enzymes that can then enter the cell through the perforin pore created by the perforin, and that enzyme can then break down and kill the pathogen. It does kill the infected cell in the process, but it kind of helps neutralize the cell to keep it from spreading the pathogen, and then the body can hopefully do mitosis and replace that damaged cell. There are also antimicrobial proteins that are found circulating in the blood and the other body fluids as well. So one type of antimicrobial protein is called an interferon. And when a cell is infected by a virus, it releases interferons, and it doesn't help the cell that's already infected, but it can block binding sites on the neighboring cells to keep them from being infected by the virus. So it's kind of like the infected cell is already doomed, but it sends out the signal telling the cells surrounding it to kind of save themselves. And it prevents the virus from being able to infect the other cells that have the interferons attached to them. Another type of protein found in the blood plasma is called complement. And basically what complement does is these proteins form something called the membrane attack complex, or the MAC. And basically this just pokes a big hole in the cell membrane of an infected cell or a pathogen, and water rushes in and it causes the cell to basically expand and explode. Complement also helps to attract phagocytes to the area, so it's involved in that chemotaxis event. And then we'll talk a little bit later about some other cells involved in the immune process, but the complement also kind of serves as a flag, and it labels cells for destruction by other cells, and we call this opsonization. The inflammatory response is also part of the secondary line of defense in the immune system. So the inflammatory response is triggered by either infection or tissue damage in an area. And there are four what they call kind of the cardinal characteristics of inflammation. Some people argue that there are actually 5 characteristics. And so the kind of the symptoms of inflammation are heat, redness, pain, swelling, and then the 5th one that some people argue is loss of function. So when we talk about the inflammatory response, we'll talk about where the heat, redness, pain, swelling, and loss of function comes from. So first of all, in a damaged area, there are specialized cells called mast cells. And these mast cells detect injury to nearby cells, and they release something called histamine. And histamine is the chemical involved in chemotaxis that helps to start recruiting immune cells to come to the area. And you may be familiar with medications called antihistamines. So one kind of symptom of allergies is you have this histamine response to something that's not really a pathogen. So you're having this histamine release just by inhaling something like pollen, which pollen is not something, it's not pathogenic, but your body thinks it is. And so it goes through kind of initiating this inflammatory response. So antihistamines are drugs that prevent the release of histamine or prevent the kind of the action of histamine in order to reduce the symptoms of inflammation. But in this case, this histamine release is actually good because it's helping to draw immune cells to the area to fight off the bacteria and help repair the damage in the area. So that histamine increases blood flow to the area, which brings phagocytes and other immune cells that can help destroy the pathogens. This blood coming to the area is what causes the area to become swollen because there's more fluid in the area. It gets redder because blood is red thanks to the hemoglobin and the red blood cells. And blood also carries warmth with it, so the area becomes warmer. And then the pain is primarily caused by maybe pressure in the area, or the damaged tissues also release chemicals that bond to nociceptors, and nociceptors are the pain receptors. And so these chemicals trigger the sensation of pain, and that pain is your body's way of telling you that there's something wrong. And then you either kind of rest and let your body heal itself, or you go find help from a doctor or something like that. Now, the loss of function, so the 5th kind of potential sign of inflammation, has to do with primarily the pain and the swelling. Because if you think about when you injure, let's say your elbow, and it's painful and it's swollen, you're less likely to want to use that arm until it's healed because it hurts to do so, and the swelling can help reduce some of the range of motion in the area as well. Now, acute inflammation is a short-term beneficial response. So short-term inflammation is actually beneficial. So if you cut yourself and the area gets kind of inflamed, it gets red, there's more blood in the area, it's actually a good thing because it's bringing the blood and the resources and the immune cells to the area to help repair the damage and fight off pathogens and end up with a repaired tissue that was damaged. Now, in some cases, chronic inflammation can occur, and chronic inflammation is a much longer term form of inflammation. And chronic inflammation is it's bad. Basically, you don't want chronic inflammation. You want the inflammation to be there where it needs to be there, but you want it to go away when it isn't needed anymore. So chronic inflammation can cause kind of long-term chronic pain. It can cause problems with loss of motion in different joints. It can lead to tissue damage and the production of scar tissue. So acute inflammation is good, chronic inflammation is typically bad.